What if you were the new kid in the galaxy, but for almost 50 years, everyone just wrote you off as too scared to even show your face? That's exactly the position humanity was in. Inside the colossal Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, a chamber nearly a mile long with a ceiling showing the live, star-dusted cosmos, representatives from 214 alien species were gathered. At the center of it all was High Chancellor Morveth, her silver robes shimmering. At nearly 400 years old, she'd seen everything, and for the last 60 years, she'd led this assembly in doing, well, mostly just talking. And that inaction was about to come back and bite them. Stick around to see how the underdog nobody took seriously was about to change the entire game. Her voice, perfectly translated for every ear or listening organ, echoed through the hall. "We will now begin the roll call," she announced, her tone thick with routine. "Let the record show attendance for the 47th Annual Summit." The names droned on, one after another. The Authority Collective? Here. The Belmathy Trade Union? Present. Then, after nearly an hour of this, the automated system called out a name that made the entire hall go dead silent. Terran Confederation. Every single eye, sensor, and bizarre alien face swiveled to stare at a single, empty chair in the observers section. For 47 straight years, that chair had collected dust. Ever since humanity got their invitation to the galactic big leagues, they had been a no-show. Terran Confederation, the system repeated into the silence. Nothing. A ripple of snickers and whispers spread through the crowd. High Chancellor Morveth simply tapped on her screen. "Let the record show the Terran Confederation has once again declined to attend. We shall proceed." But before she could move on, a loud, barking laugh erupted from the upper tiers. It was Ambassador Breath of the Colossi Dominion, a massive, scaly brute whose skin was glowing an ugly, deep purple, the color of pure contempt. "Why do we even bother with this charade?" he boomed, his voice dripping with scorn. "The humans are a pathetic bunch of primitives, cowering on their little mud ball behind a single star. They have absolutely nothing to offer us." A few other delegates rumbled in agreement. To them, humans were just some backwater species from the boring edge of the galaxy, found by a survey ship 80 years ago and not worth a second thought. High Chancellor Morveth simply held up a hand. "The invitation stands. It is protocol," she said, her voice flat. "Every spacefaring species is offered a seat. If the humans refuse to take it, that is their loss." And just like that, the subject was dropped, as it was every year. The summit then turned to the actual crisis, the Rakari hegemony. For 3 decades, this ruthless warrior species had been on a rampage, conquering dozens of smaller civilizations and turning millions of innocent beings into slaves to fuel their war machine. Ambassador Karath of the Rakari just sat there, his scarred face a perfect picture of boredom, as one delegate after another condemned his people. He'd heard it all before, just a lot of hot air. "The conquered must do something," cried the Salathi Republic's representative. "We cannot just stand by as entire cultures are wiped from existence." But Ambassador Breath, the same one who just called humans cowards, just scoffed. "And do what? Declare war? The cost would be catastrophic. We must stick to diplomacy." The Salathi shot back. "We've been trying diplomacy for 30 years. How many more worlds must burn before we admit it isn't working?" The pointless argument raged on for hours. Ideas were thrown out and immediately shot down. Sanctions were deemed too weak. A military strike was considered far too risky and expensive. In the end, the summit did the only thing it ever did. It issued a strongly worded letter of concern. The Rakari ambassador accepted the document with a smirk, promising his government would give it the full attention it deserved. As he walked out, High Chancellor Morveth felt a familiar weight in her heart. 60 years on the job and the story never changed. The strong take what they want, the weak suffer, and the rest of them write angry letters about it. Later that night, Morveth was in her private chambers when her young aide, Torf, approached her. The summit was, as expected, Morveth sighed. Another year, Another spectacular failure. "Chancellor," Torf said, his voice laced with anxiety, "you need to see this. Our intelligence division just flagged some very strange activity in the outer sectors." He handed her a data tablet. As Morveth scrolled through the report, her ancient eyes widened. It detailed sightings of unknown ships in deep space, nowhere near established travel routes. These ships were colossal, bigger than anything in the Conquered's fleet, and they moved with a speed and elegance that suggested technology light years ahead of their own. And any time a Conquered patrol got too close, the mystery ships would simply vanish. "These sightings go back 40 years, Morveth whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Why am I only seeing this now?" "The reports were filed in different sectors, by different patrols," Torf explained. "Nobody connected the dots until one analyst ran a deep-level pattern search. Chancellor, their flight paths, they all originate from the same point of space." Morveth looked up, a cold dread washing over her. "Where?" Torf took a deep breath. "Human space." The tablet nearly slipped from Morveth's hands as all the pieces slammed into place. The humans, the primitives, the cowards. "Does anyone else know?" she demanded. "No, Chancellor. The analyst reported directly to me and I came straight to you." "Good. Keep it that way," Morveth ordered, her mind racing. She looked at the tablet again. These weren't survey ships. These were warships. "I want constant passive surveillance on human space. I want to know everything, but they can't know we're watching. A report on my desk every single day." "Yes, Chancellor. What do you think is happening?" Morveth stared out at her window at the distant stars. "I think," she said slowly, "we assumed their silence was fear. We assumed their absence meant they were insignificant." She turned back to her aide, a new, terrifying thought dawning on her. What if we were dead wrong? A galaxy away, a young Conquered analyst named Yuki Tanaka was wondering the exact same thing. Her job was to monitor the unimportant species, and humanity was at the top of that list. For 3 years, she'd sifted through the most boring data imaginable about Earth. Until today. It started with a simple question that no one had bothered to ask. Why did the humans attend their first 3 summits and then ghost everyone? The official record said they lost interest. But Yuki dug deeper into the archives. She found the recordings of those first meetings and saw the human observers. They didn't look bored. They looked absolutely furious. Back then, the Conquered was debating how to handle the extermination of a species called the Melthari. The debate was sickeningly familiar. Endless talk, passionate speeches, and zero actual help. The Melthari were completely wiped out while the Conquered was still scheduling another meeting to discuss the issue. The humans had watched it all unfold, taking notes. Then, they quietly went home. And they never returned. Yuki found their last official message. It was short, polite, and colder than deep space. The Terran Confederation thanks the Galactic Concord for its hospitality and declines further participation at this time. That was it. 80 years of radio silence. Yuki leaned back, her heart pounding. The humans weren't hiding. They were disgusted. They had looked at the most powerful body in the galaxy, judged it to be a useless, cowardly talk shop, and walked away to prepare for a universe they now knew they had to deal with themselves. They weren't savages, they were students. They had been watching all this time, mapping the galaxy's powers, learning who was a threat and who was just talk. The real question was, what were they planning to do with that knowledge? As she typed up her report, she had a sinking feeling it would just be ignored like all the others. But a knot in her stomach told her this time was different. Something was coming. Way out in the uncharted blackness between the stars, a storm was gathering. 1,000 ships hung silent in the void, a fleet built in secret, their crews waiting with perfect disciplined patience. They had been waiting for a very long time, and now the wait was finally over. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the flagship Prometheus, watching the starfield. At nearly 3 kilometers long, her ship had enough firepower to crack a small moon. For Chen, it was home. She had spent 40 years in the fleet, rising from a rookie ensign to the supreme commander of humanity's entire military. In all that time, she had never fired a single shot in anger at another species. No human had. But that was all about to change. "Admiral, the intelligence briefing is ready." Chen turned away from the starlit window as her aide, Commander Marcus Webb, came to her side. He was young for his rank, barely 50, but his sharp instincts had earned her complete trust. "Let's see it," Chen said, her voice low. They moved to the ship's command center, a vast circular room alive with the hum of control stations and glowing displays. Her senior staff was already there, their faces looking like they were carved from stone. They'd all seen the initial reports. The main view screen lit up with a recording from the Concord summit that had ended 3 days ago. Chen watched Ambassador Breath's smug, dismissive comments about humanity, followed by the Assembly's predictable, useless debate over the Valkyrie expansion, which, in the end, resulted in absolutely nothing. She felt like she'd seen this exact recording 100 times over the decades. "Same old story," Captain Reynolds, the ship's second-in-command, muttered bitterly. "Talk, and more talk." "Not quite," Commander Webb corrected him. He changed the display to a new image, a lone space station in a system so remote it was a ghost on every major star lane chart. "This is Sanctuary Station. It was founded 12 years ago as a safe harbor for refugees escaping the Valkyrie. Right now, it's home to about 50,000 souls from 30 different species." Chen was well aware of Sanctuary Station. Human intelligence had been keeping a close, secret watch on it from day one. It was one of the last places in the entire galaxy where the victims of the Valkyrie could find any real safety. "The Valkyrie found it," Webb said, his voice grim. "A battle fleet left their territory 6 days ago. Based on their trajectory, they'll arrive at Sanctuary Station in about 18 hours. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. Everyone knew what a Valkyrie fleet did to a defenseless station full of refugees. It wouldn't be a fight. It would be a massacre. The survivors would either be executed or hauled away in chains, and Sanctuary Station would be turned to space dust, a cold-blooded warning to anyone else who dared to help. "And what's the Concord's response?" Chen asked, though she could have written the script herself. "The Concord has scheduled an emergency session to discuss the situation. If they stick to their usual playbook, they'll argue for a few days before issuing a statement of concern. By that time, 50,000 people will already be gone." "Of course they will," Chen said coldly. She looked around the room at her officers. These were the men and women she'd fought alongside for years, people she trusted more than anyone. They had all trained for this. They had all known a day like this would come, one way or another. But knowing a tidal wave is coming and actually standing on the beach as it rolls in are two entirely different things. "Before we go any further," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I want everyone to remember why we're here. I want us all to be crystal clear on the choice we are about to make." She walked to the center of the room, where a hologram showed the territory of the Terran Confederation, a tiny cluster of stars on the very edge of the galaxy. It looked laughably small next to the sprawling empires that ran the whole show. 80 years ago, a Concord survey ship stumbled on our home world. We were just figuring out how to travel beyond our own little solar system. We were young, a bit naive, and absolutely thrilled to find out we weren't alone in the universe." Chen touched the display, and it zoomed out to show the entire galaxy in all its glory. They invited us to join their great civilization. They showed us all the wonders of the Concord, the massive trade hubs, the star lanes, the powerful alliance of hundreds of species. We sent our people to their summits, excited to learn how so many different cultures could live side by side in peace. The display shifted, showing old, grainy footage from those first optimistic meetings. What we learned broke our hearts. We discovered a civilization that had decided injustice was perfectly fine, as long as the cost of stopping it was too high. We saw a powerful species crush weaker ones while the conquered just looked the other way. We saw entire worlds condemned to slavery because nobody was willing to risk their neck to save them. The footage showed the Melthari crisis. the endless pointless debates while an entire species was snuffed out. The Melthari were wiped out while the conquered held meetings. 12 billion beings erased from existence, and all the conquered did was express its deep concern. Chen paused, letting that bitter memory hang in the air like a shroud. Our leaders made a choice. We would not be part of a system that allowed that kind of evil to fester. We wouldn't lend our name to an alliance built on turning a blind eye. But we also knew we were too weak to change a thing. If we spoke up, we'd be silenced or smashed. So we kept our mouths shut, said Captain Reynolds. We kept our mouths shut, Chen agreed. But we didn't just sit on our hands. The hologram changed again, revealing humanity's most profound secret. Shipyards hidden deep inside asteroids, research labs floating in the clouds of gas giants, training grounds scattered across a dozen barren moons, all of it built in total secrecy, completely invisible to any conquered sensors. For 80 years, we prepared. We studied every single species in the Concorde. We learned their tech, we found all their weaknesses. We built a fleet that could stand up to any power in this galaxy, and we watched. The display turned into a horrifying montage of intelligence files, showing Vicari atrocities in brutal, unfiltered detail. Slave markets, death camps, and conquered worlds stripped bare. We watched the Vicari burn and enslave. We watched the conquered do nothing. We recorded it all, waiting for the one perfect moment when we could finally make a difference. Why did we wait so long? A young lieutenant asked, his voice cracking with emotion. If we had this kind of power, why didn't we use it? Chen had asked herself that same question 1,000 times over. The answer was never easy. Because power without wisdom is just another kind of evil. If we had charged in before we were ready, before we truly understood the galaxy, we would have just become new conquerors. We would have traded one boot on the galaxy's neck for another. She looked at the young officer with a flash of understanding in her eyes. It's easy to use power. It's hard to use it the right way. We waited because we had to learn how to be strong without becoming the very monsters we were planning to fight. The main screen switched back to Sanctuary Station, with the Vicari fleet closing in like sharks smelling blood. 50,000 people are going to die in 18 hours unless someone does something. The conquered won't. They never do. Chen stood tall, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Today, humanity does something. Today, we show the galaxy who we are, not conquerors, not tyrants, protectors. She turned to her communications officer. Signal the fleet. All ships prepare for combat. We make the jump in 12 hours. Admiral, the entire fleet? The officer's voice was full of disbelief. That's over 1,000 ships. I'm aware of how many ships I have, Lieutenant. Yes, Admiral. Sending the signal now. Across the void, in secret docks and hidden harbors all over human space, 1,000 ships roared to life. Engines hummed, weapon systems charged, crews scrambled to their battle stations. 1,000 ships, each one a technological marvel the galaxy had no idea even existed, got ready to make their grand entrance. Chen walked back to the observation window, her eyes fixed on the stars. Out there, 50,000 refugees were huddled together in terror, just waiting for the end to come. They had no idea that help was on the way. They had no idea that a species they'd likely never even heard of had been watching over them, caring about them, and preparing for this very day. Commander Webb came to stand beside her. Admiral, after this, there's no turning back. The whole galaxy will know who we are. They'll be afraid of us. Let them, Chen said softly. Fear can be a useful tool, but I hope they'll also understand. Understand what, ma'am? That we didn't build this fleet to rule. We built it to be a shield. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier has one job, to stand between the innocent and anyone who tries to harm them. She paused for a moment. The galaxy has had plenty of empires. It's had alliances built on profit and power. What it's never had is a guardian. Chen offered a small, sad smile. And that's what we are. That's what we chose to be. Not rulers, not masters, guardians. She turned to face Webb. In 12 hours, we're going to save 50,000 lives. And after that, we'll have to deal with the fallout of showing our hand. The conquered will be screaming for answers. Some will call us a threat. Others will try to use us. How do we even begin to navigate that? One step at a time, she replied. First, we save the refugees. Then, we introduce ourselves to the galaxy and tell them exactly what we stand for. With a slight shrug, she accepted it. From this moment on, they would just have to see what kind of future they could build together. The hours crawled by. Chen went over the strategic plans, met with her captains, and snatched moments of rest whenever she could, though real sleep never came. Her mind kept replaying the incredible moment that was about to unfold, when 1,000 human warships would materialize from thin air and reshape the galaxy for good. At last, the countdown hit 0. All ships report green, Commander Webb's voice announced crisply. The fleet is ready for the jump. Chen settled into her command chair, her eyes sweeping across the bridge one last time. Every face was a mask of pure determination. Every officer was ready. Signal the fleet, she ordered. Execute the jump. Imagine watching your life's work, a sanctuary for 50,000 desperate souls, about to be turned into a graveyard. That was Station Master Priath's reality, as she stared at the 60 state-of-the-art warships closing in on her home. The Verkari battle group had arrived 2 hours early, and her tiny defense force, a handful of converted freighters and old patrol boats, was hopelessly outmatched. Humanity had been hiding for 80 years, a forgotten footnote in galactic history. But if you think you know how this story ends, stick around, because you are in for a surprise. Priath felt every one of her long years. Her scales had faded to a dull gray, and her heart ached with the memory of too much loss. She'd founded Sanctuary Station 12 years ago as a beacon of hope for refugees fleeing endless wars. Now, it was about to become their tomb. The Verkari are demanding our unconditional surrender, her comms officer said, his voice strained. They're offering to accept the station's inhabitants as property of the hegemony. He didn't have to say the word, slavery, for 50,000 people who had already lost everything. What about the conquered? Priath asked, though she already knew the answer. The emergency session is still deadlocked, ma'am. No decision. Of course not. The politicians in the conquered would debate and posture while her people were shackled. It was the oldest story in the galaxy. The strong take and the weak suffer. Tell the Verkari we need time to consider their generous terms, Priath ordered, trying to buy just a few more minutes, a futile gesture she knew. It wouldn't stop the inevitable, but it might give a few more children time to find an escape pod, or a few families a moment for one last embrace. Aboard the Verkari flagship, the Dominance, Fleet Commander Torax let out a low chuckle. He'd seen this dance a dozen times before. The pathetic begging for time from the weak was an appetizer he'd come to savor before the main course of conquest. They're asking for time, his officer reported with a sneer. Give them 10 minutes, Torax said with a wave of his hand. Then begin the assault. I want this station secured before the Concorde somehow manages to grow a spine. His officers laughed. The idea was absurd. Torax leaned back, watching the station on his screen. It hung in the darkness like a frightened animal surrounded by his pack of wolves. Soon, it would all be his. The useful refugees would be sent to labor camps. The rest would be disposed of. It was just another Tuesday for the hegemony. Commander, his sensor officer suddenly spoke up, his voice tight. I'm detecting something strange. Define strange, Torax grumbled. There are massive energy blooms at the edge of the system, a lot of them. I've never seen a fold space entry pattern like this. Torax leaned forward, his good mood evaporating. The signatures were bizarre, flaring up just beyond the range of his best scanners. How many contacts are we talking about? He demanded. The sensor officer swallowed hard, his face turning pale. Commander, the system is reading It's reading over 1,000 distinct signatures. That's impossible. Running diagnostics now, sir, the officer stammered, his fingers flying across the console. Commander, they're resolving into ships, 1,000 ships on an intercept course moving at unbelievable speed. Before Torax could even shout an order, the universe outside seemed to tear itself open. 1,000 pinpricks of light blossomed in the void as ship after ship emerged from the tear in space, snapping into a perfect geometric formation. They were titans, dwarfing even his heavy cruisers, and they moved with a silent, synchronized precision that screamed of technology light years beyond his own. "What in the stars is that?" Torax bellowed. "Identify them!" "No match in any database, Commander. Their configuration is completely unknown." The sensor officer's voice cracked with fear. "They're forming a sphere around us and the station. They're boxing us in." 1,000 warships created a perfect cage of steel and light, their weapon ports sliding open, all aimed squarely at his fleet. Torax had never witnessed such a display of raw power. No one in the galaxy had a fleet this large or this advanced. Then, his comms console chirped. A voice, calm and clear, spoke in perfect galactic standard. "This is Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran Defense Fleet." For the first time in his decorated career, Torax felt the icy grip of true fear. Humans. "We are not here to negotiate," the voice continued, cool as the void. "We are not here to debate politics. We are here because 50,000 people are about to be enslaved or murdered and someone had to step up. Verkari commanders, you have 10 minutes to power down your weapons and withdraw from this system. Comply and you will not be harmed. This is your only warning." The line went dead. Torax stared, dumbfounded. Humans. The primitive species that had been hiding in the galactic backwoods for 80 years. The same species everyone had dismissed as a historical curiosity. They had built this. 1,000 ships, an iron cage around his entire battle group. They were horrifyingly beautiful, designed for one purpose and one purpose only: total war. They could have vaporized his fleet without a word, but instead, they offered him an escape. For a moment, Torax considered it. Survival was better than glory. But then he remembered the laws of the hegemony. Returning in failure, even with his fleet intact, meant a slow public execution for him and his family. He'd rather die in a blaze of glory. "All ships, attack formation," he commanded, his voice hoarse. "Target the lead human vessel. Show these primitives how the hegemony deals with meddlers." His officers looked at him as if he'd lost his mind, but decades of brutal discipline kicked in, and the Verkari fleet began to lumber forward. On the bridge of the human flagship, Admiral Chen watched them advance. She wasn't surprised. Arrogance was a terminal illness. "All ships, weapons free," she said calmly. "Disable, do not destroy, take their crews alive." The battle began, and 4 minutes and 23 seconds later, it was over. It wasn't a battle, it was a surgical procedure. The human fleet moved as one, an orchestra of silent, focused energy beams. They didn't fire explosive shells, they fired light that precisely targeted and disabled key systems. Engines sputtered and died, weapon arrays went dark, shield generators overloaded with a final pathetic whine. One by one, 60 of the hegemony's proudest warships were reduced to helpless, drifting coffins. Not a single ship was destroyed. The Dominance was the last to fall. Torax watched in silent horror as his bridge went black, the emergency lights casting grim shadows. His weapons were gone. His engines were dead. A single voice cut through the silence, broadcast directly to his dead bridge. "Fleet Commander Torax," Admiral Chen said, "your vessels have been neutralized. Your crews will be taken into custody. We are dispatching medical teams for your wounded. Make no mistake, your conquest is over." The channel closed. Torax slumped in his command chair, utterly broken. His entire fleet dismantled in less than 5 minutes without a single human casualty. What had they been building out there in the dark for all those years? On Sanctuary Station, Priyeth watched the tactical display through a blur of tears. The Vicari ships were dark and powerless, floating inside the protective sphere of the human armada. And from that armada, dozens of small shuttles were now launching, not to attack, but to head towards the crippled enemy ships, their lights flashing the universal symbol for medical aid. Her communications officer's voice was strained. "Station Master, we've got a signal coming in from the human flagship." "Put it on the main screen," she commanded. The face of an older woman appeared, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes holding a deep, unwavering calm. "Station Master, my name is Admiral Chen Wei. Sanctuary Station is no longer in danger. We are deploying humanitarian ships to provide any assistance you require. Do not be alarmed by our fleet." Pry tried to speak, but her throat was tight. The one question that had been eating away at her finally burst out. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice cracking. "Why are you helping us?" Admiral Chen gave her a smile, and it was full of genuine warmth. Because someone had to, because we could, and because it's what our people believe in. "But you don't owe us anything," Pry pushed back. "We're not your people." "Today, you are," Chen answered with a quiet finality. "Get some rest, Station Master. You are under our protection now." The screen went black. Pry sank into her chair, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. For 12 long years, she'd watched the galaxy ignore the desperate pleas of refugees. For 12 long years, she had begged the conquered for help that never came. And now, out of nowhere, salvation had arrived. She didn't understand it, and maybe she never would. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a tiny spark of something she thought was gone forever. Hope. Light years away, on Velithos Prime, the Concord's emergency session had descended into absolute madness. News of the battle had just arrived, and the delegates were in shock, completely unable to process what had just happened. Can you imagine being told that your very right to exist is a crime? That was the reality for 50,000 refugees, trapped and about to be wiped out by a fleet of 1,000 warships from the ruthless Vicari hegemony. But just as their shields were about to give out, the impossible happened. A mysterious fleet warped in from nowhere, disabling the entire enemy force in minutes with technology that made the most advanced ships in the galaxy look like something out of a museum. So the question is, were these newcomers here to save them, or were they an even bigger threat? Stick around to find out what happens next. Inside the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Vareth's scales were flashing in a pattern of pure rage. "This is an act of war," he bellowed. "The humans attacked a hegemony fleet without any provocation." The Salathi representative fired back. "Without provocation? Your fleet was seconds away from murdering 50,000 people. Those refugees were giving shelter to our enemies. We had every right." "You had no right to do anything," a voice cut through the noise, instantly silencing the entire room. High Chancellor Morvth was standing at the central podium, her silver robes shimmering under the lights. Her face was a perfect mask of calm, but her eyes were burning with an intensity that quieted every single voice in that massive hall. "For 80 years we paid no attention to the humans," she announced, her voice echoing to every corner. "We dismissed them as primitive, unimportant. We mistook their silence for weakness." She let a beat pass, allowing her words to sink in. We were wrong. With a simple gesture at her console, the main view screen came to life, displaying footage from conquered spy satellites. 1,000 ghost-like ships dropping out of hyperspace. The Vicari fleet being completely neutralized in just a few minutes. And then, scenes of human medical teams treating the very same enemy soldiers they had just defeated. "The humans have just shown us what they're capable of," Morvith stated. "And now, we have to decide how to respond. But before we start shouting, I want you all to think about something." She looked around the chamber, her gaze passing over delegates from 100 different worlds. The humans could have turned the Vicari fleet into dust. Instead, they chose to disable it. They could have let those crews die in the cold of space. Instead, they chose to save them. The reality of that statement hung in the air, heavy and almost impossible to believe. Whatever the humans are, whatever their ultimate plan is, they are not like us. They don't play by our rules. And maybe, she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, that's exactly what this broken galaxy needs. The chamber immediately erupted into 100 different arguments, but Morph was no longer listening. She was already planning her next move, a face-to-face meeting with an admiral named Chen, and the beginning of a new chapter for a galaxy that had just been turned on its head. The humans were finished with hiding. They had just made their presence known to the entire galaxy. Aboard the human carrier named Mercy, the medical bay was an oasis of calm, the only sounds being the soft beeps of medical monitors. In one bed after another lay the wounded Vicari soldiers. Their injuries had been treated, their pain was gone, their lives saved by the same people they had been ordered to destroy. Lieutenant Karath was one of them, staring at the ceiling, trying to wrap his mind around the impossible. Just 12 hours ago, he was mentally preparing himself to lead an attack on that refugee station. Now, he was a prisoner of war, and his captors were offering him a cup of water. A human woman walked over to his bed. She was smaller than he was, with warm brown skin and hands that moved with a gentle, practiced skill. She had on a medic's uniform and was carrying a tray with a bowl of something steaming. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Her accent in Galactic Standard was perfect. Karath didn't respond at first. He was trying to find any logic in a situation that had none. His warship had been completely disabled, its life support systems failing. He had braced himself for the end, but instead, human rescue crews had cut right through the hull of his ship and pulled him from the wreckage. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his throat scratchy from the smoke. "Why, what?" she replied softly. "Why help me? I'm the enemy. My orders were to wipe out everyone on that station." He paused, the words feeling like poison in his mouth. "We would have killed you too." The human medic put the tray down and pulled up a chair next to his bed. "You were following orders," she said, as if it were that simple. "You were doing what your government told you to do. That doesn't make it right, but it doesn't automatically make you a monster either." "That's not an answer," he growled. "No," she agreed, thinking for a second. "I guess it's not. The real answer is, we help you because this is who we have decided to be. We built our fleet to defend the innocent, of course, but we also built it knowing that the soldiers on the other side are still people. You have families. You have people you care about. Your life has value." Karath just slowly shook his head. The hegemony would never show this kind of compassion. If your ships were floating dead in space, our medics wouldn't be saving you. Your survivors would be thrown in chains or worse. "I know," she said. "Then why?" he pleaded. "Because we are not you." The words were so simple, but they hit him like a physical blow. "We could be," she went on. "We have enough power to do whatever we want, but we chose a different way. We chose to be better." Karath was quiet for a very long time. His entire life, he'd been taught that strength was about being in charge, that power meant having total control, and that mercy was a weakness others would use against you. And now, lying here in an enemy medical bay, being cared for by a species he'd been trained to despise, his whole understanding of the universe was falling apart. "What's going to happen to us?" he finally asked. "You'll be cared for here until the diplomats figure things out. Then you'll be sent back home to your government. No one is going to be hurt. No one is going to be mistreated." She got up and gestured to the tray she'd brought. "You should eat something. You need your strength to get better." As she walked away to check on another one of his crewmates, Karath was left alone with his thoughts and a bowl of warm soup that smelled, to his complete and utter shock, absolutely delicious. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, High Chancellor Morph's shuttle was approaching the human flagship, the Prometheus. She had insisted on this meeting herself, brushing off the frantic warnings of her advisors. Admiral Chen had agreed without hesitation. The shuttle bay of the Prometheus was unbelievably massive, large enough to hold a dozen of her own battleships. As her shuttle touched down, she saw a group waiting for her, their sharp, clean uniforms a stark contrast to the panicked mess back in her own government. Admiral Chen was standing at the front of the delegation. She was shorter than Morvith had pictured, but she held herself with a solid confidence that commanded immediate respect. "Hi, Chancellor," Chen said, offering her hand in the traditional human greeting. "Welcome aboard." Morvith carefully accepted the handshake, recalling the customs she had quickly studied. "Admiral Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. The Conquered needs an explanation." After 80 years of silence, Chen answered with a faint smile, "I'm sure you have a few questions." "More than you could possibly know," Morvith confessed. Chen walked her through the ship to a private meeting room. It was surprisingly simple, with a wall of windows that looked out into the star-filled emptiness of space and a plain table in the center. There were no guards, no visible weapons. It was just two leaders sitting down across from each other. "Then ask," Chen invited. Morvith took a seat, trying to sort through the hundreds of questions racing through her mind. She had gone over this conversation for days, but now, the most fundamental question felt like the most important one. "Why did you hide?" she finally asked. "Your technology is centuries ahead of ours. You could have been running the galaxy from the very beginning. Why stay quiet for so long?" Chen's smile was touched with a hint of sadness. "Because we attended your summits 80 years ago. We watched, we listened, and we saw endless arguments that solved nothing while entire worlds were left to suffer. We watched the powerful feast on the weak, while the so-called alliance just looked the other way. We saw that broken system," she explained, leaning in, "and we decided we wanted nothing to do with it." "So you hid yourselves away?" Morvith pushed. "No, we prepared. There's a world of difference," Chen corrected her. "If we had unleashed our power before we truly understood the galaxy, before we had the wisdom to control our own strength, we would have just become another empire. We would have turned into conquerors, because that's the inevitable result of power without principle. So what is it you want now?" "To create something new. Something better," Chen declared. "A galaxy where the strong actually shield the weak instead of preying on them. A government where discussion leads to decisive action, where we no longer ignore suffering simply because it's inconvenient to intervene." Morvith considered her words. They were beautiful, but she'd heard plenty of beautiful words in her time. "How can I be sure you won't just impose this vision on all of us by force? Your fleet could crush the Conquered tomorrow if it chose to." "That's true, it could," Chen conceded, her voice perfectly level. "But it won't. We didn't spend 80 years building this fleet just to become the new neighborhood bullies. We built it to be a shield." "A shield for what?" Morvith asked, her skepticism clear. "For everyone," Chen answered simply. "Every species, every planet, every single person who can't fight for themselves. This galaxy has had more than its share of empires. It's had alliances built on pure greed. What it has never had is a power that exists for one reason and one reason only, to defend those who cannot defend themselves." Morvith was, for a moment, completely stunned into silence. In her long life, she had met countless leaders and listened to countless promises. Most of them were hollow, but she saw something in Admiral Chen's eyes, a sincerity so deep it almost made her want to believe. "What are you asking of the Conquered?" she finally asked. "Partnership," Chen said without a second's hesitation. "Not submission, not tribute, not control. Partnership. We want to work with anyone who shares our conviction that with great power comes great responsibility." She rose and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the starfield. "The Vicari won't give up. This defeat will only fuel their rage. They'll rebuild, and they will be back. The only way to permanently break the cycle is to forge an alliance so powerful that even thinking about starting a war becomes impossible. We're proposing a new coalition, an alliance open to any species that agrees to its core values. Humanity would be just one member among equals, not the one calling the shots. We have absolutely no interest in running anyone's lives but our own." Morvith stood and joined Chen by the window, staring into the star-dusted darkness. An infinite sea of lights, each one a world, a civilization, a possibility. "You realize, of course, that there are worlds you've defeated who will never, ever trust you," she said quietly. "They will see you as a threat no matter what you say." "I know, and they will have to make their own decisions. We will not force anyone to join this, but we will also not allow anyone to continue the old game of exploitation. The era of standing by while the innocent are crushed is over." That sounds dangerously close to an ultimatum. Think of it as a line drawn in the stardust. We have decided what we will and will not tolerate. It is now up to everyone else to decide how they wish to respond. Morvith turned, looking Chen directly in the eyes. "I have been the High Chancellor for 60 years. I have seen the conquered promise greatness and deliver nothing, time and time again. I have seen entire species hauled off into slavery while we debated the proper bureaucratic procedure for filing a grievance. I have despised myself for being so utterly powerless to stop any of it." She took a shaky breath, her voice thick with emotion when she spoke again. "I don't know if I can trust you, Admiral. I don't know if your vision is even achievable, but I know with absolute certainty that the old way is broken beyond all repair. If there is even the slightest chance that we can build something better, I must be a part of it." A genuine, warm smile finally spread across Chen's face. "Then let's begin." 3 days later, Admiral Chen addressed the Galactic Concord. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed so tightly there wasn't a single empty seat. Every known species had dispatched a representative. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost taste it. Some of the delegates stared at Chen with undisguised terror. Others looked at her with a fragile glimmer of hope, but the vast majority just looked completely and utterly bewildered. Chen stood at the central podium, alone and completely unarmed, prepared to face the judgment of an entire galaxy. "I know you have questions," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I know you are afraid. A new power has appeared from nowhere, armed with technology you don't understand and motivations you can't possibly guess. If I were in your position, I would be afraid too." She scanned the enormous chamber, attempting to make eye contact with as many delegates as possible. "So let me tell you who we are. 80 years ago, humanity discovered we were not alone in the universe. You invited us to join your great civilization, so we sent observers to learn your customs, and what we witnessed shattered our hearts." The colossal view screen behind her came to life, displaying images many in the hall had tried desperately to forget. The Malari famine, the fruitless debates, the species that vanished from existence while the Concord did nothing. We watched 12 billion souls perish while this body debated an appropriate response. We watched the Ricari enslave millions while you argued over sanctions. We watched one atrocity unfold after another, and we made a choice. Chen's voice became as hard as iron. We resolved that we would never be a part of a system that permitted such horrors to exist. But we also resolved that when we finally intervened, we would not become the very same monsters we sought to destroy. She gestured, and the screen shifted, now showing the battle at Sanctuary Station. The 1,000 human ships, the entire Ricari fleet neutralized in minutes, and human medics treating their wounded enemies. We built our fleet to shield the innocent. We built it with enough power to shatter any force that preys on the defenseless. But we also forged it with the discipline to show mercy, to save lives even when it would be far easier to simply annihilate everything in our path. That is who we are. That is what we believe in." Chen paused, allowing the sheer weight of her words to sink into the silent hall. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to demand your allegiance. I'm here to offer you a choice. You can continue on as you have, bickering while innocent people suffer, upholding a system that protects the powerful and grinds the weak into dust. Or you can join us, and together we can build something new." "And what precisely are you proposing?" Ambassador Breath yelled from the floor. His voice was laced with hostility, but Chen could hear the tremor of fear beneath it. "A coalition, open to any species that will pledge to uphold its core tenets, that the strong have a duty to protect the weak, that aggression will not be tolerated, and that suffering will be met with action, not empty words. Humanity will be one voice among many, not the ruler of this new body. We are looking for partners, not subjects." "And if we decline?" "Then you decline. We will not compel anyone to join us, but we will not stand idly by and allow the old patterns to persist. If another species is threatened, if another population is facing enslavement or extinction, we will intervene, with or without the conquered's blessing. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of shouting, but Chen simply stood there, waiting with perfect calm for the noise to subside. "You have 80 years of our silence to reflect upon," she said at last. 80 years in which humanity watched and learned and prepared. We could have emerged sooner. We chose to wait until we were certain we could do this the right way. She looked around the chamber one final time. "Now, we are ready. The only question is, are you?" She stepped down from the podium and walked directly out of the grand hall, leaving 200 species to debate a future that had already arrived. The galaxy would never be the same. 1 year had passed since the battle at Sanctuary Station, and the galactic map had been completely redrawn. The Vakari hegemony was gone, not because humanity had destroyed it, but because its own oppressed people had risen up in rebellion. Once the conquered worlds realized that resistance was actually possible, once they knew a power existed in the galaxy that would have their back, they discovered a courage they thought had been beaten out of them forever. One planet after another cast off the shackles of hegemony oppression. The vast empire rotted from the inside out, leaving the Rakari to finally answer for centuries of brutality. The galactic conquered itself had fractured. Some species clung desperately to the old ways, retreating into their own systems and praying the wave of change would simply pass them by. Others had enthusiastically joined the new coalition that humanity had helped establish, committing themselves to the principles they had always given lip service to, but had never truly practiced. Admiral Chen Wei stood at the observation port of a space station orbiting a world they now called New Dawn. 6 months ago, this planet had been a Vakari mining colony, a hellish place worked by slaves from a dozen different species. Now, it was a sanctuary, a haven where former slaves could come to heal and begin their lives again. Human volunteers worked side by side with beings from all corners of the galaxy, building homes, schools, and hospitals. Medical teams were treating wounds some of these victims had carried for decades. Teachers were helping children learn to read and write in their own native tongues. For 3 generations, her family knew nothing but chains. Her grandmother died in the mines, her mother worked until her body broke, and she herself was born into slavery. But her children would be born free. How did one person, one fleet, manage to overturn a brutal galactic empire that had ruled for centuries? It's a story about a different kind of power, and it might just change the way you see the world. So stick around to hear how it all happened. The change started with skills the brutal hegemony had strictly outlawed: compassion and mercy. Commander Webb stood by the window next to Admiral Chen. He looked like he'd aged a decade in just the last year. They all had. It turned out that building something new was a whole lot harder than just tearing something old down. "The Salathi Republic just officially joined the coalition," he said. "That brings our total up to 47 species." "Good. Any holdouts?" "The usual suspects. Ambassador Breath is still trying to cause trouble, but no one's really buying it anymore. The Colossi Dominion is too busy with its own internal drama to care about outside threats." Chen just nodded. She'd planned for resistance. What she hadn't planned for was how fast everything would change once that first domino finally tipped over. "There's something else," Webb added. "Former Fleet Commander Torax wants a meeting with you. He's been released from detention and sent back to his people, but he says he has something important to tell you." Now that was a twist. Torax was the commander of the very fleet that had attacked Sanctuary Station. Capturing him had been a major turning point in the battle. What's on his mind? He wouldn't say, but he came all this way just to ask in person. Chen paused for a moment, considering it. "Show him to my office. Let's hear what the man has to say." 30 minutes later, Torax stepped into Chen's private office. He was a shadow of his former self, thinner than he'd been a year ago. His scales seemed to have lost their shine, and he no longer carried himself with that all-consuming arrogance. Defeat had clearly changed him, right down to his very soul. "Admiral Chen," he said. His voice was formal, but you could hear the respect in it. "Thank you for seeing me." "Former Fleet Commander," Chen gestured to a chair. "Please, have a seat." Torax sat down with a heavy sigh, as if he were carrying the weight of 1,000 worlds on his shoulders. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands, searching for the right words to begin. "I spent my entire life believing in the hegemony," he finally said. "I believed strength was the only thing that mattered, that power was meant to be used, and that the strong had a divine right to rule over the weak. I killed for that belief. I conquered entire worlds for it. I enslaved innocent people because I truly thought that was just the natural order of the universe." He finally lifted his head to look at Chen. "And then you shattered my entire fleet in 4 minutes without killing a single one of my soldiers. You captured me, and you treated my wounds. You gave me food, you gave me water, and you spoke to me like I was a person, not just your enemy." "You are a person," Chen said, her voice soft but firm. "That's the thing. I never understood that. It never occurred to me that you could treat an enemy with dignity, that you could win without being cruel, that you could hold unbelievable power and still choose to be compassionate." Torax just shook his head in disbelief. "In your prison, all I had was time to think. I thought about every slave I'd ever taken, every planet I'd conquered, every horrible thing I'd ever done in the name of the hegemony. And I realized I had thrown my entire life away in service to a lie." Chen just listened, letting him speak. She'd seen this before in other Ricari prisoners, completely transformed by their first real encounter with human kindness. It was moments like these that gave her hope for the future they were trying to build. "The hegemony is done," Torax said, his voice thick with emotion. "My people are scattered, broken. We have nothing left but our own shame." He sat up a little straighter then, a spark of his old military discipline flickering to life. "But I've decided that shame can be the beginning of something new. I've come to offer my skills to your coalition." Now, that was a real shocker. "Doing what?" Chen asked. "Whatever you need. I know Vicari military strategy better than anyone alive. I know where all the secret weapons caches are, the names of war criminals who escaped justice, all the dirty secrets the hegemony kept hidden, even from its own top commanders." He paused, taking a breath. "And I can talk to the other Vicari," he added. "The ones who are lost and confused, who have no idea how to live in a galaxy that isn't all about conquest. I can be the living proof that change is possible." Chen studied the old warrior, sizing him up. She'd become a pretty good judge of character over her long career, and all she saw in Torax's eyes was raw sincerity. His old arrogance had been completely burned away by loss and quiet reflection. In its place stood a man desperately trying to find a way to make things right. "You understand that many species will never forgive the Vicari for what they've done," she said gently. "You might have to spend the rest of your life hated for crimes you can never undo." "I know," he replied, "but I have to try. I have to do something, anything, to help rebalance the scales, even if they can never be perfectly even again." He looked her right in the eye. "I've heard you humans have a saying. Something about the longest journey beginning with a single step." A small smile touched Chen's lips. "Yes, we do say that." "Then let this be my first step," Torax declared. "Whatever you need, whatever I can do to help, I'm ready. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn it." Chen was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, she gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "We have a program for former hegemony soldiers who want to make a difference. You'd be starting at the very bottom. You'll be taking orders, not giving them. Doing whatever grunt work needs to be done. It won't be glamorous. I wouldn't expect it to be. Then welcome to the coalition, Torax. Let's see what you can build now that you're done tearing things down." That evening, Chen attended a ceremony on the surface of New Dawn. A new community center was opening, built by volunteers from a dozen different species. It was designed to be a gathering place for the settlement's rapidly growing population. The crowd was a beautiful mix of faces that would have been unthinkable just 1 year ago. Former slaves stood shoulder to shoulder with their former masters. Species that had been locked in brutal wars for centuries were now working together, hanging lights and setting up chairs. And their kids were all playing together, completely oblivious to the long histories of hate their parents had managed to overcome. As the ceremony wrapped up, a young woman approached Chen. She came from a species that had been nearly wiped out by the hegemony. Her people had been down to just a few thousand survivors before the coalition had set them free. "Admiral Chen," she said nervously, her translation device working quickly to keep up. "Could I have a word with you?" "Of course." I just wanted to say thank you. My family, we were slaves for 3 generations. My grandmother died in the mines. My mother worked until her body gave out. I was born in chains." Tears started to well up in her eyes. "And now, because of you and your people, my children will be born free." Chen felt her own eyes start to sting. "We only did what anyone should have done a very long time ago." "But no one else did," the young woman whispered. "You did." She reached out and gently took Chen's hand. "Is it true? That your people waited 100 years to act? That you could have helped us sooner?" It was a question Chen had heard many times before, and the answer never got any easier. "Yes, it's true," she admitted quietly. "We could have revealed ourselves much, much earlier." "Then why didn't you?" Chen looked out at the diverse crowd, at the former slaves and former soldiers, all trying to figure out how to live together in peace. She saw the children who would grow up never knowing the horrors their parents had survived. "Because if we had come then," she said softly, "we would have come as conquerors, not liberators. We needed time to learn how to be strong without becoming the very monsters we were fighting." The young woman processed this for a moment. "So what happens now?" Chen smiled, her mind flashing back to a conversation she'd had with High Chancellor Morvath a year ago when the future was just a blank page. "Now," she said, "we build something worth protecting." After the ceremony, the crowd slowly disappeared into the warm night. Chen took a quiet walk through the settlement, watching families head home, seeing lights flicker on in windows, witnessing a real community rising from the ashes of a fallen empire. A year ago, humanity had arrived at Sanctuary Station with 1,000 warships and changed the galaxy overnight. But it was never really about the ships. What truly mattered was everything that came after. The choices they made, the values they fought for, and the hard day in day out work of building something new from the ground up. The coalition wasn't perfect, and it never would be. There would be arguments, setbacks, and times when those old ugly habits would try to resurface. But there would also be progress, slow, steady progress toward a future where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. Chen made her way back to her shuttle as the first stars began to pop out in the night sky. She had a busy day tomorrow, meetings with new species that wanted to join, talks with those still on the fence, and blueprints to review for the next phase of rebuilding. The work would truly never be done. But that was okay. That was what hope looked like in the real world. For thousands of years, the galaxy had been ruled by empires. It had been run by alliances built on mutual benefit and cold, hard self-interest. It had never had a guardian, a power that existed simply to shield those who couldn't shield themselves. Now, it did. Imagine being told your entire life doesn't matter. That's what the Krill were facing. A mega corporation, Vorcorp, was literally stealing the air from their planet, and the high and mighty Galactic Council just looked the other way. In the middle of it all was Ensign Eva Rostova, a human nobody, a junior supply officer on a forgotten space station. They told her to file her reports and forget what she saw. But how do you forget the cries for help? If you've ever felt like the little guy, completely ignored, you need to hear what Eva did next. Stick around, because this is a story about how one person can change everything. Eva wasn't a soldier or a diplomat. She was basically an interstellar accountant. Her life was a blur of inventory sheets and docking schedules. But she'd made friends with the krill traders, a gentle, insect-like species who communicated through clicks and whistles. She learned that the beautiful chimes they carved from moon crystals weren't just art. They were their history, their family trees. And now, Vorkorp was grinding those moons into dust for profit. One day, a young krill named Chitak gave Eva a small, flawed chime as a gift. It barely made a sound. That same night, she intercepted a coded Vorkorp message, boasting about their pacification of the krill home world. They weren't just stealing air, they were slowly poisoning it to wipe them out. Eva tried to send the proof up the chain of command, but her message was mysteriously deleted. Then her access codes were suddenly revoked. That's when she realized her own captain was on Vorkorp's payroll. She was trapped completely alone, or so she thought. Remembering the flawed chime, she fiddled with it and discovered a hidden seam. Inside was a tiny data crystal. The big reveal hit her like a supernova. The krill weren't primitive, they were post-technological. They had abandoned advanced tech centuries ago, but they kept fail-safe backups. The crystal didn't just have proof of Vorkorp's crimes. It contained the schematics for a clean energy source that would make Vorkorp's entire operation obsolete. In a desperate move, Eva used an old decommissioned broadcast array to send the data crystal's contents not to the corrupt council, but to every single news outlet in the galaxy. The fallout was immediate. Vorkor's stock plummeted to zero in under an hour, its executives were arrested, and the complicit council members were disgraced. The krill's technology, given freely, sparked a new era of prosperity. Eva, the quiet accountant, became a symbol of a new galactic philosophy. Humans weren't conquerors. They weren't out for power. They were the ones who listened when no one else would. They were guardians. And for the first time, a seat at the council was offered not to a general or a politician, but to a humble ensign who showed everyone that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a starship, it's doing the right thing.